Thank you, Willie. And thanks everyone for coming. I said I could project until that thing turned on, whatever that is, but that's okay. I can project. My mother was an actress. She gave me her projecting genes. I always thought that was sort of an interesting blurb that got quoted all the time when I wrote Cowboys Are My Weakness. These are the stories that might have emerged if an intelligent woman had followed Hemingway around. There's something definitely backhanded about that, but it stuck, and it's just one of those things that stuck to me. But I always think about that. If an intelligent woman had followed Hemingway around, I mean, it begs the question, would an intelligent woman have followed Hemingway around? That's the first thing. But anyhow, I'm going to be reading to you from Contents May Have Shifted. I've written a bunch of new essays lately, and I was thinking about reading them. They have a sort of feminist bent. I finally turned 50, and I think I have something to say. And I was going to read one of those, and then I thought, no, you guys get that all the time here at your women's college. And then I was walking around and I saw all the banners that say, what do they say? The women in the world?
The world, period, for women.
The world for women. The world for women. So I thought, well, that's what this book is. That's what this book is. So I'm looking forward to reading from it. I'll tell you, because I know there are writers in the room and they're in my class, and I want to thank you guys for your enthusiasm this week, and look forward to the rest of our week together. I'll tell you how this book got made, or how it began. I was asked to go to Madison, Wisconsin, to a book festival there. And I was asked to be part of an evening called Unveiled, where 5 writers were asked to read work that was completely untested and untried. And I like that kind of assignment. That sounded like fun to me, and I agreed and was excited to go to Wisconsin, a place I hadn't been very much, maybe ever. And but I was on tour with my last book, my book Sighthound, when this all happened, and so I wasn't really writing. And so it got really close to the time I had to leave, and I didn't really have anything brand new to read. So I got on the plane to Wisconsin, and I just started writing. And I thought, well, this will be taking the assignment really seriously. And I did just what Willie described. I did what I tell my students to do when they claim writer's block or whatever. I say, just write down the things in the world that have glimmered at me, that have arrested my attention. So I wrote them down. I tend to do things in 12s, as you will see. 12 is my number. I think of a group as 12. I'm not sure why that is, moons or months or apostles, I don't know. But 12 seems to be the right amount of things in my brain. So I wrote 12 of these little glimmers, and I worked on them on the plane, and I had about 48 hours after I got to Wisconsin, and I worked on them, and I didn't really have time to make a story per se, to kind of stretch them out and make them seem linear. All of my stories are born much the same way, where I just take a piece, and then pull them together, pull the interesting pieces together, and then sort of make them seem linear or chronological, but in fact, that's not how they begin. They begin just the way these did, and I didn't really have time to do that, so I thought, well, I'll just sit these 12 next to each other and put them in an interesting order and let them bounce off each other, and we'll just have to go with that because I was out of time. I had no choice. And right before I went to read, a few hours before I went to read, I thought, well, I should just look at that email and make sure I did everything I was supposed to do. So I looked back at the email and checked the amount of minutes I was supposed to read, and I had the right amount of time, and everything seemed good. But then it said, the only caveat is that you have to mention the state of Wisconsin. And I was like, shit. Because I hadn't mentioned Wisconsin. I hadn't hardly ever been to Wisconsin. I didn't know anything about it. So I had to take one of these 12 and put them aside. I put one aside called Goosenecks of the San Juan. They were all named with the place they took place. And so I pulled out Goosenecks of the San Juan because it was the one I was the least happy with. And I went down on the street corner in Madison, Wisconsin. I waited for something to happen. And after about 30 minutes it did. And I went upstairs and I wrote it real quick, and that became number 11, Madison, Wisconsin. And then I read that night with the other readers. And one of the other readers was a writer named Richard Bausch, who's a reader I have always admired, a short story writer primarily, one of the finest short story writers, I think, of our time. And he was there, and so after I got done reading, he came up to me and he said, well, that's your next book, write 100 of those, and that's your next book. And I thought, well, no, not 100, 144, because of my 12th thing. But I also thought, you know, Richard Bausch has just given me an assignment. So I went home and then spent the next several years just collecting these glimmers. And like 12 was easy, 144 was harder. But writing them and honing them and compressing them, I'm big into compression and making them, squeezing all the words I could out of them, and then another couple years of ordering them. And I wanted them to feel random, but I also wanted them to add up to something. And so anyway, that's this book. That is what turned into this book. And I will start. There are 144 chapters, mini chapters. 132 of them take place someplace and are named with that place. 12 of them, every 12th one, takes place on an airplane. They become sort of the metaphorical conveyance of Pam, the narrator Pam, coincidentally, through the world. So I'll start out with an airplane story, and maybe read another airplane story along the way. And then we'll get into some of the other chapters. All right. This is Delta 55. The plane is gradually but perceptibly descending. It is barely light outside, and we aren't due at Orly until nearly noon. There is an odd ticking noise coming from the wing outside my window. I come fully awake and realize we are listing strenuously to the right. I glance at my seatmate on the aisle. Her name is Rebecca. She is a 26-year-old bank teller from Cincinnati who has never flown before, who has saved for 5 years to take her dream trip to Paris. I spent most of dinner telling her how much safer airplanes are than car travel, how the 777 has a minimum of 3 fail-safes on each of its major systems, how even if one of the engines fell clean off the fuselage, it is designed to tumble backwards, up and over the wing, so it doesn't tear the wing from the plane. Now, in spite of all my reassurances, we seem to be heading shoulder first into the North Atlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot says, as many of you are probably aware, we are descending, preparing to make an unscheduled landing into Reykjavik, Iceland. Approximately 35 minutes ago, we experienced an explosion in our number 2 engine, and that engine is now inoperable. The ticking sound you hear is the wind running through it, spinning the blades backwards, much like a household fan. You can probably also tell that we are tacking toward Iceland, as we would in a sailboat, as our current engine configuration will not give us full power in a straight line. Now Rebecca is awake and looking at me wild-eyed. The man likes a metaphor, I say, and offer a small smile. The light out the window has strengthened, and I can see whitecaps on an angry gray sea. I always kind of wanted to go to Iceland, I say, but by now Rebecca is no longer looking at me. She has her eyes closed tightly, has given herself, I imagine, to prayer. We will be landing in approximately 15 minutes, the captain says. Please give your undivided attention to the flight attendants as they instruct you in landing in the brace position. I like that he did not say crash. I like that he's a language guy. The ocean is getting quite a bit closer. No sign of Iceland out my window, and I hope that Reykjavik Airport does not turn out to be a metaphor for fucked. Just when it seems that our wheels have to be skimming the water, land and runway lights appear, and then more of them. So many lights it is hard to count them. A sea of spinning red and blue. Every ambulance and fire truck in Iceland seems to have come out to greet us. Holy cow, I say, just before the wheels hit the foam and the foam splashes up and covers all the windows, throwing the cabin in a half-light exactly like waking up in a tent after a snowstorm, and then everyone is cheering as the plane glides to a jerky, sticky stop. Much later, in an upstairs blank space of terminal, as we are being fed rice with some kind of yellow chickeny goo all over it by something resembling the Icelandic Red Cross, the crew tells us the reason for the emergency equipment. When the number 2 engine exploded, it spit jet fuel all over the fuselage. We were a Molotov cocktail hurtling through space, is the way the literary pilot puts it. There was no way to be certain that the friction of the tires on the runway wouldn't make a spark and ignite us, turn us into a 90-mile-per-hour ball of flame. This is another airplane story. I am flying out of the little Delta drainage, tucked illegally into the luggage area of George White's converted Super Cub. Converted, that is, to haul gear instead of a passenger. It is not that my presence puts us in danger, George assures me. I am well within the aircraft's specs, weighing, as I do, significantly less than a boned-out moose or caribou. But there is no seat for me, not to mention a belt, so my instructions are to make myself look like a duffel bag when we land in Fairbanks and wait for the all clear from George before I untangle my limbs and crawl over his seat to the door. George is one of many pilots who found their way to Alaska more or less straight from Vietnam. I once saw him break a 9-year-old boy's arm at the dinner table right after the boy, in an attempt to get his mother's attention, put the tines of his fork through the back of her hand. I have also watched him dig through buckets of rusted nuts and bolts to find the one ancient screw that will restart a seemingly defunct airplane engine. He likes to push both the light and the equipment, landing on airstrips made of nothing but river rock between steep canyon walls deep into the Alaskan twilight. George uses a great deal of duct tape. He has gone down 3 times because of some combination of weather and equipment failure, and he has walked away each time once for 75 miles before he hit the nearest road. His brother, who I flew with out on the coast from Dry Bay to Yakutat, the clouds forcing us so low that we could feel the spray from the breakers on the bottom of the aircraft, so low that we could watch the brown bears chasing each other off the wild strawberry patches on the beaches, had not been so lucky. His death slowed down George's adrenaline-seeking tendencies not one iota. Normally, George flies me in and out of the backcountry in the Mall, his newest and safest plane, the only one licensed, in fact, for commercial passengers. But today the Mall is down, and so I am in the back of the ancient but trusty Cub, my knees up around my ears as the wheels leave the rocky runway. It is only about a 45-minute flight back to Fairbanks, where in winter pilots have to call ahead and ask the luggage handlers to chase moose off the runway. But this is September, and the tundra is red and golden below us, giving way as we head down valley to dense forest, an occasional moose standing in a little tarn carved out long ago by the glaciers. We have seen 5 big bulls since we became airborne. We are about halfway to Fairbanks when the engine sputters and quits, and George's hand jerks up to the tank control, and then his shoulders slump, and he says, "Shit." And I say, "What?" And he says, "What do you think? We're out of gas." What scares me more than anything is the violence with which he jerked his hand. For 10 or 20 seconds, we ride in the very particular silence of a small plane, gradually losing altitude, and then George says, "Do you remember, like in the last few minutes, any place we could maybe put this thing down? A lake, a dirt road, even a river?" What I remember from the last few minutes are a few tiny glacial tarns and a million frost-heaved spruce trees pointing drunkenly in every direction. "I don't," I say. "Here," he says, shoving the open aviation chart over the seat back toward me. "We're somewhere around in here." He indicates vaguely with his finger. See if you can see anything up ahead, even a cut for a power line. Sometimes those are wide enough. I try to make sense of the map fast, try to ignore the fact that the treetops are getting closer. It looks like there's some kind of dwelling to the north, I say, with a little road coming into it, and he says, how far? And I say 4 or 5 miles, and he says, I don't think we can make that. I know plenty about the need to be airborne, and plenty about how raising the degree of difficulty sweetens the pot. I understand why Alaska and why fly in only Alaska and why even that isn't far out enough. I know what it's like to feel calmer, better, face to face with a female grizz at dusk on a caribou trail than when I'm contemplating, say, a year or a month or even a week in the significant comforts of my very own house. I know all about the anatomy of restlessness and the crossover point of adrenaline addiction, but I'm not quite ready to be accessory to George's own personal death wish, even so. It can't hurt to try, I say. By my best guess, we are now less than 2,000 feet above the treetops. Well, he says, there is one other thing we could do. And I say, what's that? And he says, switch to the reserve fuel tank. And with that, he raises his hand to the little lever, switches it to the left, points the nose slightly downward, and the single engine sputters back to life. This is for Juneau, Alaska. They said we wouldn't see any orcas. They said the humpbacks were in, and when the humpbacks were in, you didn't see the orcas because the orcas are predators and the humpbacks are prey. It's been a long day. We've been all the way up Tracy Arm to the glaciers, and everyone but the captain and I are sleeping when word comes over the radio, orcas in Shearwater Cove. By the time we get back, there's nothing stirring. A couple of lazy humpbacks out in the main channel, a sure sign that the orcas are gone. The captain is worried about the hour, worried about the fuel he's got left, worried about his daughter, who's got magenta hair and a t-shirt that says, "This is what a feminist looks like," who is back from somewhere like Reed College, working on his boat this summer, selling sodas to the tourists through a permanent scowl. There's a fin flash on the far side of the channel, distant but unmistakable. Orca, male. The captain says that's 4 miles across this channel minimum. I show him the silver charm around my neck, remind him that it's my last day in Alaska, promise to swim for shore if we run out of gas. Don't lose that fin, he says, turning the bow into the sunset, but I couldn't lose it if I tried. The water of Stevens Passage backlit a million diamonds rushing toward me in the sun, and one black fin, impossibly tall, absurdly geometric, the accompanying blast of whale breath above it superimposed onto the patterns of life. Spotting whales at sea is not so different from spotting deer in the woods. For hours you see nothing, and then you see one, and suddenly you realize you were surrounded. This pod has 25, by my best counting, the one male who keeps his distance and 24 females, all of them running steadily west. We get out in front and the captain shuts down the engine. Every time the big male's fin turns itself up and over and back down under the surface of the water, I can't help myself, I gasp. We are directly in the path of one of the females. Every time she surfaces, we can hear her breathing. Every time she surfaces, I can see the spot of white at her heart. 20 years ago, on my first trip to Alaska, I bought a string of white heart trade beads, and for this trip, I tore the house apart to find them. In 3 more dives, she'll be under the boat. I touch the beads at my neck and try to guess which side of the boat will get me the closest. The others are stirring, crowding the port side, watching her approach. I choose starboard. She dives one last time and I start counting. At 5, she rises right under my hand. The breath from her blowhole is cold on my face. If I dared, I could reach down and touch her on her white spot. Someone behind me screams, maybe the captain's daughter, but the whale is already diving, already resurfacing a few yards farther on. I listen to the sweep of her fin, the puff of her breathing until she disappears into the disappearing diamonds. When the male's big fin is the only thing visible, a speck on the horizon, we turn the boat north and head for home. This is Ban Zhanghai, Laos. My guide Zai and I are standing in the warm mist of a Mekong River morning in the village of Ban Zhanghai, Laos, watching an unusually tall Laotian tend his boiling vats of Lao Lao, the rice wine moonshine that has put his village on the map. Monkeys scream in the trees above us, and a gentle-faced woman stands nearby holding a glass I fear is meant for me. It is slightly after 8 a.m., and in America that would be good enough reason to decline politely. But here in Laos, where decorum is far more rigorous and complicated than it is in America, I'm pretty sure there isn't going to be a way out of drinking the pickled Mekong water that is about to come from the steaming, rusted 50-gallon drum. I reassure myself that no self-respecting amoeba could possibly live in 80-proof hooch, and quickly down the glass of white I am offered, which gets me another glass, and then a glass of red, which I realize the second it goes down my throat without searing my tonsils isn't nearly as strong as the white. I am seized with regret, flooded by premonitions of feverish vomiting in a Laotian healthcare facility. I do what any sophisticated world traveler would do and stuff an entire antibacterial wipe into my mouth, and during the tour of the brightly painted temple, suck every drop of juice out of it I can and swallow. Oh. Outside the temple, a beautiful woman is making ferns and bougainvillea and daisy petals out of colored paper. I buy a small bouquet from her and ask if I can take her picture. She says something to Zai and he translates. She says she should take your picture because you are the beautiful one, and I can tell by the tone in his voice that he thinks she is mistaken. Zai is the most formal guide I have ever had in Asia, which is saying a great deal. He had been a monk for 3 months at 18, then he became one again for 1 day last year when his mother died so he could carry her body, he says, to the other side. His English is impeccable, except that he says electric city when he means electricity, and comfort table when he means comfortable, and anyone can see why he would think that was correct. At least twice a day he says, if I am not speaking right, you will please graduate me, but I rarely do. I'm pretty sure I have managed to eat the antibacterial wipe clandestinely until we are back on the boat heading downriver to the magical city of Luang Prabang, and Zai says, have I told you yet how the Buddha died? When I say no, he says, he was invited to the house of a friend for dinner and they were serving pak. Pak, I say? Pak, pak, he says, mildly impatient with me as usual, and he makes an oinking noise in his throat. Ah, I say, and Zai smiles. He knew the pak was bad, Zai says, knew even that it would kill him, but he ate it anyway because it was most important not to offend his host. I guess that's the difference, I almost say, between Buddha and me. But on the off chance that Zai has paid me a compliment, I smile out at the muddy river and nod. This is Tucson, Arizona. I have not been on the property 30 minutes when I am lying on a massage table in a softly lit, frangipani-scented room with a person named Trevor towering over me. I can see, Trevor says, that you are doing a lot of spiritual work because look how far you are out in your hair. His accent is vaguely South African and he has the most impressive unibrow I have ever seen. I do not read poetry, Trevor says, because I live poetry. He picks my feet up and lets them fall back to the table. May I ask you, he says, why the lower half of your body is perpetually standing in ice-cold water? He means energetically, of course, because the room is warm and my legs are dry. And what happened here, he asks, not waiting for an answer. He has his hand on my leg at the exact place where, when I was 4 years old, my father threw me so hard against a big oak wardrobe that I broke my femur. The bone healed 40 years ago. I was casted from the tip of my toes to my armpits for months, but Trevor is not the first healer to be able to see what happened. My father, I begin. I am not afraid of your pain, Trevor says. I am not afraid of your grief. I am not afraid of your terror. You want to know why I'm not afraid of your terror? I nod. I am not afraid of your terror because I have gone inside the monster, and inside the monster is pure wonder. Somewhere in this building, my friend Willow, who I have come to Canyon Ranch with, is getting a nice, simple lavender scrub and an herbal wrap. Willow looked through the catalog, thought, yeah, the first night, maybe a nice herbal wrap after all that travel. Pamela, Trevor says, will you tell me your father's name so that I may ask him to excuse himself from the lower half of your body? Yes, I say, and I do. Sebastian, Trevor says, Sebastian, you must get out of there. Sebastian, he says, it does not belong to you. He has his eyes closed and his hands tight around my ankles. No, Sebastian, he says, more forcefully now, there are no options. We stay like that for an excruciating amount of time. Then he folds my hands across my chest and covers them with his. If you could have only one thing, he says, would you choose peace or ecstasy? Ecstasy, I think, though I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to say peace. Peace is an illusion, Trevor says. I am in the ecstasy nearly all the time now, even when I sleep. I think of the composer's lonely bedroom, the terrible black sheets, the clock radio projecting blood-red digits onto the ceiling, his bald head a glinting Cabernet color like someone already dead. Pamela, Trevor says, slapping the bottom of my feet with his palms. Yes, sir, I say, out of habit. He's got my wrists now, is stretching them back over my head. No one has ever called me Pamela except my father. You have two glasses, Trevor says. One is completely full and one is completely empty. In which glass is stillness possible? The full one, I say. The questions are getting easier. Trevor now has his powerful thumbs wrapped almost completely around my uppermost vertebra. You can get to stillness through ecstasy, he says, but you can't get to ecstasy through stillness. Think about all the ways the language of the New Age is custom made for terrorism. I think about when a pink mouth opened in a white sky over Davis, and I saw for the second time the cupped waiting hands. When one of the doing lines in your life intersects with the circle of your now, Trevor says, what happens? It has to bend, I say, confident. It bends and eventually becomes a circle. Precisely, he says, and releases his death grip on my neck. This is Drigung, Tibet. Shring and Haley and I follow an old lama to the top of a bald hill above the monastery in the cool morning air. We have been told there will be 3 corpses, a man, a woman, and a child, and that they are unrelated, though they appear to us like a little family, laid out on the platform, wrapped in their cotton shrouds. We are very lucky, Shring says, many corpses today. When he says corpse, it sounds like copse, as in pines. The man who will prepare the bodies arrives and begins to unwrap the first corpse. A little ways up the hill, roughly 100 vultures jockey for position against a rope held in place by family members of the deceased. They are wild birds, but Drigung is the most accessible monastery practicing sky burials. The birds know to come at 11 for their almost daily feed. Shring told us the bodies would be quartered, but the word filleted is the one that jumps to mind. He explains that the man with the big knife will make 4 incisions, 1 around the chin, 1 down the center of the torso, and 2 at a diagonal down the shoulder blades. They pull the skin off the bones, he says, because if they don't give the vultures the bones first, they sometimes eat the flesh and leave the bones, and then the whole person doesn't ascend together. And there is more work for the butchers to pound the bones into pulp. He hesitates enough over the word butcher that I know he is not quite happy with it, but he doesn't know a better one. These men, he says, that do the cutting, they are not allowed to marry. Their karma is very bad, same with the men who butcher animals. Do you mean this job is punishment for their last life, I ask him, or that they will be punished for this job in the next life? Yes, he says, also jewelers, it is the same. Jewelers, I say. Why? It is just what we believe, he tells me. Is it because they are wealthy, I ask? It is just what we believe, he says again. All 3 bodies are cut into pieces, and I miss whatever sign the Lama gives to the men who have been holding the rope. When the vultures run in, the smell takes up all the air on the mountaintop, and as they rush past me, I can see they are huge birds, each of them half the size of a man. There is squawking and shrieking. Several birds go after one femur, another makes off with a forearm, the hand with all the flesh still on it bouncing along the stones at my feet. No fewer than 6 birds are pulling in different directions on a skull that is still attached to a spine that is still attached to one leg, and the skull is laughing. The old Lama plays tug-of-war with a vulture over a leg bone, and when he wins, he lifts another vulture, this one nearly featherless, out of the melee and gives him what is left of the bone. That is a sick one, Shrink says. Every so often, the butcher picks up an especially aggressive vulture by its head and hauls it off to the side. When there is nothing left but skulls and pelvises, the butcher steps back in and pounds the big bones into pulp with a giant mallet. Bone pulp flies all over the place, and a huge wad of it lands on Shring's arm. In seconds, a member of the family of the deceased comes over with a little bottle of alcohol and wipes it clean for him. His preparedness makes me realize this must happen all the time. Shring smiles at the man out from under his Scooby-Doo hat. On the walk back down the hill, Shring says, "When I see a sky burial, all desire to have money and get more things goes away. Because you see a man, then you see him dead in a ball, then you see him cut to pieces, and in 20 minutes he is nothing. It is like he never existed." Shring picks sage so that we can burn it in the little stupa back at the monastery. When we get there, he shows me how to stick my whole upper body in so that I won't take the bad, dead people luck with me back into the world. When I can't see or breathe anymore, I pull my head out, but Denzing grabs me by the scruff of the neck and pushes me back in. It is very unusual, Shring says, when Denzing finally turns me loose. A Westerner here at this ceremony. Denzing is afraid that now the car will crash. Denzing holds Haley in the stupa so long I think she will surely asphyxiate. When he finally lets her out, he talks with urgency for several minutes to Shring in Tibetan, and when he's finished, we ask what he said. Shring thinks a long time and says, "Denzing says it is good to be happy all the time." "Really?" Haley says, "all those words?" "And," Shring says, after a pause, "he says it is sometimes also good to be sad." This is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Driving from Chicago in the -6-degree weather, neck craned out the window looking for the lunar eclipse because the rocket scientists told me to, but the light pollution extends all the way to the Wisconsin border, and I think I'm probably facing the wrong direction anyhow. If I became the rocket scientist's girlfriend, the fortune cookie about me being the reasonable one would never, ever, ever be true. In Milwaukee, everything is frozen solid. The river, the stoplights, even my car door. But when I get to my high-rise hotel room, there is the eclipse right out my window, halfway over and looking strange enough to scare a caveman or an ancient Egyptian to death. Trish comes to meet me for breakfast with her sperm bank in vitro baby, and I have no idea how to respond as she details all the ways her life has become a living hell. She knows I thought she was crazy to do it at her age, alone with her 80-hour-a-week job, and now here she is, as if to prove me wrong, but everything she says makes her life sound about 10 times worse than I could have ever imagined. The lake is frozen as far out as you can see, blocks of ice heaved up on the shore like wrecked cars, and Cliff Parker, whose law firm is sponsoring my visit, picks me up and takes me to the Milwaukee Country Club for lunch. It is so much like the country club in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania that my father could just barely afford to belong to. It takes my breath away. Only it is like it is still 1972 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The white wallpaper with little parasol-toting maidens doing tour jetés across it. The 4 dead gray-haired ladies propped up in the corner as if to look like they're playing bridge. The place probably seats 250, not even counting the no women allowed grill downstairs, and yet other than the dead ladies in the corner, we're the only ones eating today. The point of this luncheon, I quickly understand, is so that Cliff can show me why he is a lawyer and not a writer, to show me the kind of life he gave up writing for. He has invited 8 people to the luncheon besides the 2 of us, and exactly none of them show up. I can't decide if Cliff Parker is a sociopath or just so completely normal that he's incomprehensible to me. Our waitress is actually named Trudy. She has a beehive hairdo and is at least 114 years old. We both order the Cobb salad, and for some inexplicable reason, it takes 45 minutes to arrive. The room is being heated to a sultry 85 degrees, and there is a squirrel hurling himself repeatedly at the floor-to-ceiling window behind Cliff's head. Over and over, he climbs the nearest tree and then flies, flying squirrel style, and lands splat with his face against the window, where his paws achieve suction for a little more than 1 second before he slides like a cartoon character down to the bottom of the glass. He does this 5 or 6 times before I comment on it, though it makes such a terrible noise every time he hits, I can't believe Cliff doesn't turn around. Probably rabid, Cliff says, with a casual wave of his hand, and I feel my eyebrows go up, and he says, a lot of the squirrels around here are. This is Portland, Oregon. Rick says, Pam, if everyone deserved a down pillow, there wouldn't be any more birds. This is 111. Trenton, New Jersey. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that my back hurt so much because when I was 4 and in my 3/4 body cast, my mother found it easiest to carry me around upside down like a monkey, using the plaster bar the doctors had fashioned between my knees to keep them for 3.5 months, the correct distance apart. And let's say she did just that until my second to last appointment, when the orthopedic surgeon said, you haven't been carrying around by this bar, have you? And my mother shot one quick glance at my father and said, of course not, no. And it became a funny story the 2 of them liked to tell together to friends over a couple of drinks. And let's say that when their friends asked, as of course they would, how in the name of heaven a 4-year-old breaks her femur, they said that I had somehow managed to pull the giant wardrobe over onto myself, except instead of wardrobe, they would have said credenza, because it would have made us sound richer than we were. I still don't see how it would make me feel any better to think of the pain in my hip and spine as anything other than my most loyal and valuable companion. The continuous non-voice in my ear that says, you got out alive and you still get to go. No 2 people who have ever lived loved to travel more than my mother and father. They gave that love in their fashion to me. And I will conclude with Istanbul, Turkey, for Cheryl. If she's here, Cheryl. Cheryl's not here. Oh, yeah. At the Sultan's Palace, beautiful long-limbed girl, sexy but not too sexy, lots of brassy hair, surrounded by 7 or 8 international travelers her age. To an Australian boy with acne scars, she says, you are walking through the Topkapi Palace with 3 beautiful women. What more do you want? The other young women are not in the same room of beautiful as she, but they accept the compliment, don't dare to interrupt. The boy says, maybe if you were all naked, and laughs. One of the other girls, a Swede, says, no, meaning, go fuck yourself, acne face. The brassy-haired girl holds her fingers to the Swede's lips, says, my parents taught me never to say no immediately. To men, the Swede asks. To anything, she says. Istanbul is the only major city in the world that is situated on 2 continents. Since 330 AD, it has been the capital of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Latin Empire, and as recently as 1922, the Ottoman Empire. In the hilly streets, ruin leans into palace, leans into internet cafe. We are in line waiting to get into the harem, miles of tiled, low-lit corridors and rooms so thick with ghosts of women in captivity you can feel their hair on your arm, their jasmine-scented breath on your face. In the Blue Mosque, there are 250,000 tiles the color of sky. When the sun comes out, inside is sky, and outside is golden. I am 46 years old and ashamed of the fact that this is the first mosque of my life, but later, when the evening call to prayer catches me in the garden between the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia, call and echo and answer, bouncing off domes and turrets that have stood on this hill for 1,500 years, I know faith springs out of doubt like topsoil, and one thing I am is here right now. Across the Golden Horn, where the Bosphorus meets the Sea of Marmara, the Asian part of the city glistens in the twilight. As a candidate for the center of everything, Istanbul beats Pueblo, Colorado, hands down. The gulls are turning cartwheels around the towers of the Blue Mosque and cawing like crazy women. Byzantium, I say to them, Constantinople. The circle of my now is wreaking havoc with the lines of my doing. I am learning to say yes, if not always immediately. A sweet-faced Turkish boy, maybe 19, offers me a Kleenex, puts both hands over his heart when I take it, says I look just like his mother when I cry. Thank you.